Hello there. My name is Jim Jones. I'm what would be considered a rail enthusiast. Third generation, in fact. My grandfather worked in the railroad business for the Canadian Pacific in Richford, Vermont, and my father worked on the Canadian Pacific, became a school teacher, but moonlighted in railroading up until his mid-60s. My mother worked for the railroad. My brother worked for the railroad. I was the only one who did not work for the railroad, but obviously the apple didn't fall too far from the tree because I've written 11 railroad books and produced 40 railroad film documentaries, all the while holding down 40 years as a radio air personality. And over the years, I have met Rodger Brassard, who has his own transportation history.
Yeah, hi, my name's Rodger Brassard. I started driving city bus here in Burlington in 1967, and I retired when I turned 65, having driven for Vermont Transit and Greyhound and Premier Coach.
Rodger used to drive the railroad club trips down to Springfield, Massachusetts, where once a year some 25,000 rail nuts all congregate at the exposition there. And Rodger was not just our driver, but part of the party.
Yeah, good trips.
And that was when I met Rodger. So we became friends and decided it would be fun to talk about Burlington area transportation history. So we mentioned our credentials. Things started for the Burlington transportation history in 1872, but it took a while for things really to literally get off the ground. They talked about having a horse-drawn trolley, but it didn't come to fruition until the year 1885, when, oddly enough, some out-of-towners decided to put their money where local businessmen's mouths were and raise the capital to create what initially was the Burlington and Winooski Railroad Trolley. And here is a nice big photograph of the horse-drawn trolley from the year 1888 on Church Street in downtown Burlington. So it became an electrification project in 1893. The thing to do in the 1890s was to electrify, and the Burlington Traction Company was formed in 1896, a combination of two different trolley companies, one that served Burlington and Winooski and another that served part of Winooski, the brand new Fort Ethan Allen, and went all the way to Essex Junction where they had the Central Vermont Railroad Station. So that's a little bit on trolley history. Rodger, feel free to jump in anytime you want. Rodger not only has been a great customer of my railroad books over the years, but sometimes he quotes back some of the more interesting things. What did you find interesting about the Burlington trolley story?
I thought the whole thing was interesting. There's so little information that was out there, and your book covered every aspect of it. I was always fascinated when I saw the first pictures of the trolleys, the horse-drawn ones, and then, of course, when they electrified it. I always try to figure out how they got up the hills and everything else. It just was interesting. The book covered all of that. It was great. It's a great book. Recommend it for anybody to purchase.
Well, as you would imagine, it's called trolley wire, trolley wires. I thought it was such a clever name when I came up with it.
Trolley wires to rubber tires.
To rubber tires, thank you. Who wrote the book? Was it me or Rodger?
Oh, Lord.
I didn't talk for a living for 40 years. So one of the things about the trolley when it was horse-drawn was that sometimes it would be two horses. Other times it could be one horse, depending on the route that they were taking and the size of the trolley. Now, Rodger had mentioned some of the hills that were a problem. For horses, not as much as when it became an electrified system, because you could have trolleys all over the Burlington system. You might have one in the south end of Burlington, one over in Essex Junction trying to climb the Summit Street Hill. Maybe another one doing its best to work up Colchester Avenue, and it would bring a load down on the entire electric system. So you're overworking the amount of electricity that was available in those days. So they tried to work the trolley schedule so that it would accommodate some of that, but you couldn't always figure that out. This was before the days of GPS and cell phones and even dispatching. Where are you? Well, you didn't really know where the other person was exactly, but you knew they were doing their best to stay up with the busing schedule and the trolley schedule. So speaking of that, you could tell us more about the schedules of the buses, which probably were very similar to how they ran the trolleys. Were you held to, like, 1 or 2 minutes usually?
Yeah, because there was connecting service. If you were on a route that was coming into Burlington, like the North End Loop, which was around Manhattan Drive, you might have people on there that are going to the airport, so you had to be within 5 minutes of getting downtown so these people could transfer from one bus to the other. There were ways that we could do it in Winooski because the Essex bus would come down and it would go Riverside Avenue and it would meet in Winooski, and the Winooski route would go up over the hill. So if somebody was coming from Essex and they wanted to go to the hospital, as they were coming down in Winooski, they'd flash their lights so that the bus on the other side would stop and wait for those people to come across. So that we had our ways to get it, to get communication with each other. But other than that, there wasn't anything. Just hang on and go. So, but yeah, it was a great job. I had done it I started in 1967. I did it until the line was was abandoned by Burlington Rapid Transit and taken over by CCTA back in the day. And I think it was about a year's lapse before that came on. And we watched the slow death of Burlington Rapid Transit. They will tell you that when you raise fares, you lose passengers, and when you lose passengers, you have to raise fares. And since it was wholly subsidized, they could see the future, and they knew that they had to get rid of it. Burlington Rapid Transit was tied in with Vermont Transit. That was the mother company, and they had taken about all they could in losses, and so that's when it got abandoned.
So during World War II, the buses were doing gangbuster business because of the gas rationing, tire, rubber rationing, and people were using the buses much more. But then at the end of the war, people started coming home. They were buying second automobiles, and a lot of the bus ridership went away. And for the trolley, it was a similar thing. After World War I, the automobiles became far more prevalent, far more reliable. They were no longer a seasonal thing that you would put up on blocks for the winter and take your horses around town the rest of the time. It became necessary for people to get around with automobiles for the many places that were not on the trolley tracks. And it was quite a contentious thing in 1919 when the trolley fares went from 5 cents to 7 cents. It was not a glam job. I mean, these gentlemen who were and I believe it was exclusively male in those days, and we'll talk about the busing era in a few minutes. But these people who worked on the trolleys, they had to buy their own uniforms. They had to keep those uniforms clean and dapper. And they worked 7 days a week. Yep. And they were working, starting wage in 1918 was $18 a week. And the rates went up to a whopping $20. And there wasn't a lot of money. There were a lot of expectations. There was no vacations in those days. So some people call them the good old days. I'm not so sure. By the time we got to the busing era, had some of those conditions improved?
Yep, by far. I mean, the trolley guys worked outside on some of these cars. We were all inside. We had heat. We had good heat, and they were comfortable. When I started driving, the city buses never had power steering, so it was manpower going around the corners, and you learned how to approach those corners very carefully to get around them. And of course, if you had a full load of people on board, it was even harder to steer. And the first city buses that we had that I was driving were little 4-cylinder jobs, so they would work hard coming up Colchester Hill. The second generation of buses that we had, a lot of people would be familiar with the longer fishbowl style. We call them fishbowls because they had glass in the front all the way across the front. And they had V6s, and they would motor right along. It was much easier to keep a schedule. But in the wintertime, if it got below zero, those big buses couldn't put out enough heat. You didn't work them hard enough to put enough heat. And there was one stretch where we were 10 days where it never got above zero. And we were driving with jackets on, our coats. We were driving with gloves on. And we'd stop, take our gloves off, make change for the passengers when they came back on, put the gloves back on and drive to the next. It was cold. There was no way to cure it. But the little old 4-cylinder buses, they put out plenty of heat. So those were the buses that you'd want to get when it was cold. So, and speaking of change, this is what we all carried. It's a changer, and you had nickels, dimes, quarters, and a token for tokens, because you could go to the bus station and you could buy tokens, and that was the equivalent of whatever that fare was. So, and the tokens would fit in here. You would dispense them. The people would take the money. You'd take the bills. They'd give a change, and there was a meter that was on the side here, and you'd put the money in the meter. And then we would, at the end of the day, we'd have to cash it all and account for it. So, and you could also buy tickets. There were tickets for school. Tickets for school students. There were tickets for Essex Junction for zones, because everything was zoned. So if you were on the end of the zone, it might cost you 50 cents to go to Essex Junction, 35 cents to go to Winooski, but we'd have to punch them, and we all had ticket punches, so that we had to carry. So it was fairly interesting work.
And there was just one of you on the bus.
Yep.
You had to do it all. You
Did
had
it
to
all.
drive, you had to...
Yep. Babysit times.
So you ran in Vermont's all-season weather.
Mm-hmm.
What was the difference from one season to the next when you were bus driving?
Spring was great because you could have all the windows open. Winter was bad. It wasn't good because if you had your side window open and you come by a bunch of kids, 9 times out of 10 they were throwing snowballs at the bus, and you wanted to keep your window closed, otherwise you're going to get hit by one. I remember one time with one of the old buses, I came to the top of Colchester Hill, and it was glare ice, and the police were letting one vehicle at a time go down, and I came down that hill with my right front tire on the curb and just trying to keep the bus from accelerating until I got to the bottom. Once you get to the bottom, it was fine, but they never got salt up there. So those are kind of interesting times. No air conditioning on the bus, so it could get hot, but those days you're a heck of a lot younger than I am now, so you could adjust to it a lot better. So
summertime must have been lots of fun with no
fun.
air conditioning.
Yeah, it was fun.
Didn't you have a little fan in the corner there?
Those fans were more for defrosting the window than they were for driver's comfort. We had a vent down below that would open up, and we had vents over the top that would open up, but you had to be going in order for the air to come in there, so when you stopped, you weren't getting any. So, but
My father worked on the railroad. He used to describe how awful it was during the fall because leaves would get on the rails, and he said it was like grease.
Yep.
Was there a similar situation with the busing?
I never slipped on leaves or anything like that. That I can ever remember. And I go back to trolleys for one thing. We went down to the Trolley Museum in the New Hampshire coast, and it was raining. We got on the trolley for a ride. We got on it, and I was shocked to see how hard it was for that motorman to get that rolling without the wheels slipping. I figured all that weight on that steel, it would go, and those wheels, when they were wet, would slip. So I was pretty shocked about that. I didn't realize that those were didn't have that amount of traction. So, but.
Then we come to winter time. Now, were these at that time like poly-ply tires, or were you running radials on buses?
They were old-fashioned tires. They were hard rubber tires. There were no snow tires in those days. You drove by the seat of your pants. You really did. like any large vehicle, as long as you kept moving, you were good. You ever stop, if there was any kind of snow, you might have trouble getting going again because there were no snow tires in those days. So,
Did you ever encounter any clearance issues with a bus somewhere, maybe a fallen tree limb or things like that that you hadn't
no, I
anticipated?
never. We were lucky here in Burlington. We never had anything like that happen. When I became an over-the-road driver for Vermont Transit, and we had friends that drove out of Montreal. This young man had gotten a Greyhound Super Scenic Cruiser, which is the double-deckers, and he didn't pay any attention to heights, and he got down on Stero Drive and took the whole roof off of it. And the only way they could get it out of there was to deflate the tires and pull it out with a wrecker. And there were people injured on the bus, and that was his last trip. So heights and things, in a lot of places you had to be careful for, but in Burlington we had no height restrictions at all. There was nothing that we had to worry about getting under.
It's always interesting when I look at some of the Facebook posts for some of the local history groups where people say, they ought to bring the trolley back. And as much as I love rails, there are so many advantages to buses. First of all, they can go anywhere, a bus virtually anywhere. I mean, a bus can take a detour if it has to, if there's street work. A bus has the ability to stop much faster than anything on rails. Yeah. And anytime a subdivision is built in an area, with a trolley, you would have had to build the rails even farther. Plus, you have rails in the middle of the street, which can get in the way of a lot of things. And the buses just share the roads with everyone else. No particular adaptations required that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. You do have your bus stops, but most of those aren't even pullovers, are they?
Burlington Rapid Transit had signs, metal signs out for some of the stops. And other stops, they were painted with permission. They were painted on telephone poles. They were green, yellow, and green with BRT usually on those. And I mean, if somebody was running to a bus stop and they were halfway down the block, you'd stop and pick them up. I mean, you should. That's what you should do. Most of the stops were marked. Downtown, we obviously worked out of St. Paul in Maine, so that was another place. That was a junction stop. The hitching post on Main Street was also where connections were made, and Liggett's was another one for Burlington. So those were connections were made there. But
tell us a bit about the bus terminal. I remember as a child growing up in Burlington that they had a restaurant there and a large cavernous waiting area.
Yep.
And there always seemed to be something coming and going from there, whether it was the big buses for Vermont Transit or perhaps the Burlington Rapid Transit buses.
Burlington Rapid Transit buses pulled in on the St. Paul Street side, and Vermont Transit worked on the Main Street side. And we would have to angle. You pull in the bus and you'd angle and you'd put your wheel against the curb and pull your handbrake on because, I mean, to keep it from rolling. And the same thing with the Vermont Transit ones. And one of the drivers one day came in and he was here in a hurry to go in and do something. And if you opened your back door, that locked your brakes on. And he didn't curb the bus, and somebody got in and was cold and knew how to close the door, and the bus sailed across the street and hit the Howard Bank. That wasn't very nice.
About how many buses, if you know, a day would go in and out of that terminal?
Oh, God. Vermont Transit probably at least 10 to 20 departures and 10 to 20 arrivals. And of course, the city buses was just constant. Every 20 minutes, a cycle would be on. Every half an hour, there'd be a cycle on. So there was a lot of traffic. For a little town like Burlington, there was a lot of bus traffic.
Yeah, essentially Burlington's train station, which we now know as Main Street Landing, saw its last passenger trains in 1953 when the Rutland Railroad stopped running. But the Central Vermont, the other railroad in town, stopped running in 1938. In fact, at that point, they were only running 2 passenger trains in and out of there because they had made a deal with Bill Appleyard, the owner of the Burlington Rapid Transit, to have the buses replacing the trains. That went back to 1931. It was a very early arrangement. And the railroads were glad to not have to run all those extra trains because people weren't riding the rails, especially locally, like they once had. And also smaller, what they called less than carload business. Small little packages. If I wanted to take this soda can and ship it from Burlington to Winooski, the railroad would have been obligated to do that. And the bus company was happier to do those small kinds of things. I mean, you had a lot of paperwork you had to sign and payment that had to be made, and it was much more trouble than it was worth. So very quickly in the 1930s, the Burlington terminal for buses really became the place, whether it was rail, early planes, and trains.
Yep.
And it was conveniently right across from City Hall Park.
Yep.
Right there, you had the Van Ness Hotel for years, up until its 1950 demise. You had Hotel Vermont. You had the Flynn Theater. I mean, there was a lot right in that general area. You had the restaurant at the terminal and a number of other places right down there by the corner of St. Paul and Main Street.
Fillets, great place to eat.
Yeah, tell us about some of the culture around the bus terminal in Burlington. The things that bear repeating.
Yeah, certainly nothing like going into the Greyhound station in Boston. That was entertainment. Burlington, not so much. It was a fairly respectable crowd, as I recall, going in and out of there. Valet's restaurant was right next door, so it was a great place to get food. There was a travel agency on the other side that was hooked to it, that was Vermont Transit operated. But yeah, it was old-fashioned. It had like 4 bay windows where your ticket agents could operate, and the whole time that I was there from '67, there was only one window ever open. I don't know why they had 4 or 5, unless it had gotten really busy back in the old days. It was possible, but that station was there back, I would say, in the 30s, maybe?
Early 30s. I've got a
Early 30s.
1938 advertisement in one of the city directories that advertises the brand new, what we now would consider Art Deco stylings in the front of the building.
Yeah. I remember overhead in glass, it was steamship, airlines, trains, buses, planes. It was all in glass all the way around there. That was the place to get all your transportation from.
Love all that cool advertising signage for sure.
Absolutely.
So we have the history of the terminal a little bit from the bus era and going back to the train era. Burlington had 2 Union stations, the one that we still know today, and then another one that had been right on College Street where there's now a parking lot. And many people would remember the Pease Grain Company if you've been in the Burlington area for a long time. It was roughly at that location. During the trolley era, they had several spots, but because of its central location, the City Hall was kind of an unofficial headquarters for the trolley company because so many trolleys were in and out of there every 15 minutes or so. One was going in one direction or another. So that was a spot that would be considered a trolley hot spot as opposed to the buses and trains that we've also mentioned. Now, where did the trolley system go? We'll talk about that for a minute, and then we'll see how things changed during the bus era. So first of all, we had, let's call City Hall in Burlington the central location. You had a line that went down Main Street to the Union Station. You had another one that went down Pine Street, and that went all the way down to what we now know as Flynn Avenue, with spur tracks off to Lakeside, but only just a little ways to the Queen City Cotton Company. That was the end of the line, just a little 1/10 of a mile spur off Pine Street. And then down on Flynn Avenue, then known as Park Avenue, went down to what was known as Howard Park, and that is across from where today's City Market is. So that was another spur. Now it's not called Park Avenue anymore because of the confusion of Park Street and Park Avenue. So something had to give, and John J. Flynn's name was taken for Flynn Avenue. So now we're in the south end of Burlington with a line that also turned east and went up Flynn Avenue to Shelburne Road. So there's part of the south end. So let's go back to the City Hall, and now we're going to go up Main Street past what used to be Strong Theater and go to Edmonds, then High School, and turn right. You're now headed south on South Union Street. So you go through that nice little residential area and then down to what we knew as the traffic circle. Some people call it a roundabout. I don't know what you call it now. Some people call it chaos, but it was also known as Star Corners back in the day. So you're down there by the traffic circle. Continue down Shelburne Road. This is the trolley route, and in those days the only stop was Clymer Street. And if you know the south end of Burlington, that's just a little teeny-weeny dead-end street, but there wasn't too much else down there at the time. There was the Home for Friendless Women. Later on, it became renamed the Lund Center. And then a little farther down, you had the Home for Destitute Children, which later on became the Baird Center. And then the line ended eventually over by Queen City Park, where there is a one-way bridge. It goes over the still existing railroad tracks. That was the end of the trolley line. Do I have a picture of that? We'll see if it's big enough to make it. This was a picture of the end of the line. There we go.
Yep.
And you can see the bridge over there, roughly the location of today's Queen City Park Bridge over the railroad tracks. And then they had that little shelter down there, and there's a trolley, and this is circa about 1910.
Yep.
So now you have the tour of the south end of Burlington. Let us retreat to the City Hall again. Now we go right up Church Street to the top, and then we turn right. So we're headed east, but only for one block. And then we turn left and we go up North Winooski Avenue. And then we go as far as North Street. Now we're going to turn left and go west on North Street to North Avenue. So you're at the corner of North and North. You turn a sharp right and go down North Avenue. And in those days, they went as far as Lakeview Cemetery and St. Joseph's School. A little bit later on, they continued the trolley line out as far as Ethan Allen Tower, which was the end of the line. So now you've gone out that way. So now let's retreat again to the corner of North Winooski Avenue and North Street, but this time we're going down North Winooski Avenue. So for those who've been in Burlington a long time, I mean, when I was growing up, I loved North Winooski Avenue because not only did you have Kassler's Toys, you had Dairy Queen, and you had the Bus Barn. It was heaven for those of us in the South End. So, and at that point, I didn't realize that the Bus Barn had a longer history than that. It went all the way back to the trolley era. And this is where I'm going to ask Rodger. Rodger, what do you remember about the activities at the former trolley barn during the bus era?
Oh boy. That was the hub for all the maintenance that Vermont Transit had. They actually rebuilt engines in there. They repainted the buses, and they had their own paint shop. The engine, we had one guy that could rebuild engines, and they would come out easily better than even the manufactured ones. So he was really good at what he did. There were, in those days, there were pits. You can't have pits anymore because of the danger of that. Everything has to be lifts. But in those days, there were pits. And if you weren't very careful, you could drop a wheel into a pit, and it was a struggle to get that bus out of there. Anybody that goes by there, those doors are gone, but those were wooden overhead doors, and they were the 4 largest wooden overhead doors in the state of Vermont. They were huge. Then there was constant work in there because between the Burlington Rapid Transit and Vermont Transit, that's where all the equipment was taken care of. So, and further down where the trolleys would come in, on the lower part was where the buses were brought in and they were washed and they were serviced with brakes and refueled, and the toilets were taken care of. Burlington we had a special permit that we could dump the toilets there, and the city would obviously go into the city system, but they had to get a special permit to do it way back in the day. But it was a busy place. There were a lot. The mechanics were all great guys. If you were off duty, it'd be a great place just to walk around and learn about how things are fixed. And you could tell them that there was something with this bus that you didn't quite like, and they would attend to it. So it was a great place to be, a great place to work, and fun to be around.
I've heard about the family atmosphere over there. For example, when one of the employees was very, very sick, members of the bus company went over and painted his house for him.
Yep, yeah, that happened to Winooski. Driver had come down with a liver disease, and his house needed painting. And about 25 of us showed up in the morning, and by the time we were done that afternoon, the house was painted, trimmed, everything. The garage, made the free press. Got a picture of us in the free press. But that's the way that company was. Both Vermont Transit and Burlington Rapid Transit was a brotherhood. You ate, slept with the drivers. Your families got together. Your kids played together. When something happened, you hurt together. Funerals, things like that. Weddings, we all participated. So it was a great family affair. It's a unique company that way, and friendships were made that were never broken.
There was a smooth transition from the end of trolleys to buses. So we haven't talked too much about the trolley after World War I, but as you would imagine, with more and more motor vehicles on the roads and less manufacturing, so there was less commuting, the trolleys fell on hard times. There were cars everywhere. You see photographs of trolleys, and there are cars on all sides of the street, and there were more and more close encounters of the worst kind. So with all of that and the antiquated equipment, more and more people found the trolleys to be more a nuisance than anything else. And in fact, the trolleys were not publicly owned, they were privately owned by businessmen and stockholders. And they weren't making their money from transportation. They were making their money from selling electricity. So basically, early in the 20th century, the trolley company, with electricity becoming more and more popular and more homes using electricity for all kinds of things, they invested in the Otter Creek Falls power station in Vergennes. And then they ran 22 miles of line in 3 sets, so really there were 66 miles of lines that went from Vergennes to Queen City Park substation at the intersection of Pine Street and Queen City Park Road.
That little building was.
That's where the old what building was?
So that's what that little building was at the end of Pine Street.
That's what that little building was at the end of Pine
go.
Street. It's,
Yeah.
the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. And this is what's so much fun about history, is that between us, we can put some of the pieces of the puzzle together and put some of those scattered pieces into something that makes sense. So yes, that was the power station. I remember it there as a kid, and again, I had no idea the significance of that at the time. And then they ran the lines down to through the city of Burlington to where the trolley bus barn was, and quite a facility there, where they turned that energy into something that would feed the trolleys. And we've got pictures in my book, trolley wires to rubber tires. I had to look at it to make sure. And it's just amazing the amount of technology that went inside that building just to get the juice where it needed to go. So that building thankfully was saved in the year 2000. It was put on a historic list. And there's still some mechanical stuff going on there, but it's because it's the Good News Garage now.
Yep.
So that still continues a tradition in one way or another of mechanics that go back to the year 1885 for that building. Wow. Anything else we should talk about with the trolley bus barn?
Not really. Once Vermont Transit had been purchased by Greyhound, the strike came along and things got whittled down, and they closed this garage, and they closed the garage in White River. So the only facility to get any buses worked on now was for that company was Boston. So it was sad because the mechanics of Vermont Transit were probably the most loyal the most loyal employees that company had. They ate, slept, and worshiped Vermont Transit. So sad.
And the history really began when Bill Appleyard ended up purchasing the trolley company. Did not have the assets of the power station at Virgins. That went to the Fauché Corporation. And he ended up telling people that there is no way I am going to inconvenience people by having to get off a trolley and transfer onto a bus or vice versa to make their trip. It's going to be all buses. And so that's what happened. In August of 1929, the last trolley went into downtown Burlington. So basically, it happened like this. It was August 4th of 1929. There had been advertisements in the local papers for weeks. Come take a free ride on the trolley, which basically would be your last ride on a trolley. Free rides all day. And we're going to take everyone to Burlington's City Hall. And so they had a crowd estimation of anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people. And they were all taken down by trolley to the City Hall Park. And then they started to hear the sound of a band playing very sad funeral dirge sort of music as something was coming down Church Street. Turned out it was a black gray paper decorated trolley, basically the oldest one that still could get out of its own way. And it went down the street and it turned right onto Main Street, and then it stopped in front of the Hotel Vermont. And two of the senior members of the trolley company who had gone back to the electrification era of 1893, these guys had 30, 40 years history under their belt, were asked to take a can of kerosene. Everybody was told to stand back. They doused the car in kerosene, threw a match, and that car basically burned. And some people have heard that all the trolleys were burned. Well, actually just that one trolley. A number of them were scrapped for the steel. The wood was either reused or maybe burned down to the pulp, and then they would take the metal and reuse it. However, some of those cars became excellent garden sheds. Yep. Do you remember the gas station at the traffic circle? This might be a little bit before your time, before the Crosbys had their outfit there.
Yeah, I remember the Crosbys, yeah. That was before my time.
Just ahead of the Crosbys, there was a trolley there.
Oh,
and it was a gas station, and they used the trolley as the office for it. And they're fairly little cars. They could make nice garden sheds, excellent diners.
Yep.
There was one in Winooski for a number of years. Do you recall the diner in Winooski?
Is that Bill's? No, there was another one besides Bill's. I remember Bill's, and it looked like a trolley, but the other one I don't remember that.
Well, apparently it lasted for a number of decades, and it had become very rotted, and it was taken out. It was removed, and during the process of debrisement, they found the trolley bell.
Oh.
And of course, those bells were down low. You would use your foot to hit the bells as you were the trolley driver.
That's right.
Engineer would be using his foot to make the bell go. So it was right down there on the ground. And some members of the Winooski Historical Society were given that bell to restore. And if you'd like to hear how it sounds, visit the Winooski Historical Society Museum and they'll ring your bell for you. And basically a lot of the streets of Burlington, people heard that annoying bell every 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Yet another reason why some people probably would like to not see the trolleys return. So here we are, we were talking about the relatively seamless transition. We've got Bill Appleyard who buys the trolley company, but ahead of that he had bought a Chrysler dealership. And he opened up, he was selling automobiles, and Chrysler told him, you know, we have this line of Graham buses, and we would like you to sell them. We have X amount of quota of buses that we want to see you selling in an average year. So talk to potential people who could use buses. So he talked to the management of Burlington Traction Company, the trolley company, and they said, you know, we're not interested. We're a trolley company. We're not going to be buying any buses. So Appleyard went back to Chrysler and said they don't want any buses. So he was told that maybe you ought to start thinking of something a little more inventive. And I'm going to ask you, Rodger, to tell me a little bit about the one route that was chosen in the Burlington area that did not compete with the buses yet, that Mr. Appleyard chose to turn people on to buses. It was a fairly upscale neighborhood in the hill section. Yep. And people could ride for free on these shiny, new, smooth buses.
Yeah, it left downtown and it went up Main Street and turned right on Summit Street, went down to Cliff Street, then turned left and came down Prospect Parkway and then back down and circled around Church Street and College Street and Main Street and continued that loop. And it had no competition with the trolleys, and from that, it got better and better and better. People were riding it, they loved it, and the rest, they say, is history. The trolleys went out and the buses came in.
Yep. So let's say it's 1928 now, the pressure is on, Burlington is expanding, North Beach is expanding, and the bus company was told that you need to serve North Beach.
Yes.
You can't leave people at the corner of North Avenue and Institute Road. That's a long walk. So they're like, well, we can't lay rails down there. So what did they end up doing?
Put a bus on it.
Did they buy a bus from Bill Appleyard?
They must have.
No.
Oh, all right.
They bought a Studebaker, a competing bus. So that was the only bus that the trolley company ever owned. And a year later, the trolley company did in fact sell out to Bill Appleyard, who very quickly dismembered the system of trolleys and had the ceremonial burning of that one trolley, which, by the way, made worldwide news. Yep. It was filmed by Path Films, who came in from the big city. They filmed it, cut it up a little bit, edited it a little bit, and it was shown in movie theaters as a feature in between double featured movies.
Wow.
All over the place. And Burlington is starting to hear from other cities that are planning on getting rid of their trolleys, who were inspired by this great showmanship, and asked, how did you do it? Well, it turns out they hired, Bill Appleyard hired a drama teacher from Burlington High School who came up with the idea. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It certainly got the attention. So at the end of the flaming inferno there at City Hall Park that day on August 4th of 1929, everyone was brought home in shiny new buses. They kept them on standby over by Union Station, and when the fire was over, they came up and got them.
Yep. Yeah.
So that was essentially the end of the trolley history in Burlington. But we haven't finished up on the 16.2 miles of Burlington's trolley. So when we last left you, we were over at the North Avenue Trolley Barn. And I keep saying interchangeably bus barn because really it was a bus barn as long as it was a trolley barn, just about the same amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to go down Riverside Avenue, heading toward Winooski. And at that point it was known as the Lower Road because the higher road was Colchester Avenue.
Colchester Avenue.
Yep. So we're meeting at the bridge now, another line. So stop here at the bridge in Burlington, looking over at Winooski. Now let's backtrack to the City Hall Park in Burlington, go up Church Street again, but this time go up Pearl Street because you have to serve the hospitals up there, UVM and Ira Allen School. You've got Centennial Field. So you did have that line that went down Colchester Avenue, but didn't go straight down Colchester Avenue.
Jeez.
I mean, you guys had to do the full Wazzola. You didn't turn on to Barrett Street and then turn left, did you?
There were runs that came up that street, and they would go. The morning trips you would go over Chase and come up Barrett.
Okay.
Yep. But that was just a little service for them. Every other trip we did it. Yeah.
Because it would have been so horrific to, let's just say the brakes are failing on the trolley or you're sliding.
Yeah.
You can't go straight down that hill. It's just too much. So what they did was they had a little switchback. And so if you're heading to Winooski from UVM, you're going to turn right after the Greenmount Cemetery and go on to Chase Street.
Chase Street.
And then you go down past that beautiful Chase house. Yeah. That is so cool.
Gorgeous.
And then you turn left onto Barrett Street. And now you're going to find your way back out by the bridge where Riverside Avenue meets with Colchester Avenue. So let's cross over the bridge now into Winooski. We're going to go up Main Street. And then when you cross over the railroad tracks, and you may not even know you are crossing over some railroad tracks, they're still there. That's up on Main Street, and that's where it becomes the Military Post Street Railway Division of the Burlington Traction Company. So you go up the hill part way, and then you turn right onto East Spring Street. There was a lot of industry on East Spring Street and East Allen Street. That's where they had the Porter Screen Company, the largest of its kind in the world until 1952, when the screens were replaced because they were wooden frame screens with aluminum, and it's been that way ever since. But during the trolley era, there were a lot of riders. So now you're turning at Hood's Crossing, and it's still a rail crossing for the New England Central, and you're going up East Allen Street, Route 15, past St. Michael's, and then you're going to go past Fanny Allen, which was known as Dunbar Station at the time, and then you've got 40th and Allen, which had a number of stories in the book, including some of the soldiers on the weekend who wanted to go down and have a little fun. They'd go down on the trolley and they would have too much to drink and they would have a grand old time. Then they'd get back on the trolley and they might put off the trolley engineer somewhere along the way and take over the trolley themselves. There were a number of stories like that. So now we're going to go past 40th and Allen. We're in Essex Junction now, on Essex Junction's Pearl Street. You'll go past the fairgrounds, which were only there starting in 1922. They had been over in Essex Center before that. So for 7 years, the trolleys did serve the fairgrounds. And then you go into Essex past Five Corners, and you turn right, or left rather, at the Brownell block, and then you are at the station on Railroad Avenue. So there you are, 16.2 miles of Burlington Traction Company's ultimate route that was built in various stages between 1885 and 1929. Then we had the buses, 1929 to the present, with 3 different operations. Currently, GMT has a much larger schedule, many more routes, than what they had in the trolley era, because basically they can go anywhere the streets grow.
Yep.
So when Burlington Rapid Transit was running buses, they clearly, when North Avenue expanded, way out, the buses could go there.
Yep.
So by the time you were driving, you must have had a number of areas, Burlington, Essex, Winooski. What other places were on the Burlington Rapid Transit schedule?
So one of the schedules was it was the airport north end loop. So the bus would leave from downtown, would go out to the airport, come back around, back down on Main Street, and then it would do north end loop, which was up in would go by Mojave Sedek and come back down. I can't think of the name of that street. And Archibald Street. And then it would come back around, work around Battery Park, and then come back to the terminal. That was one. And the Essex Junction Burlington South End would start out at the hitching post, which is the corner of Church and Main. It would work itself up into Essex Junction, go to the train station, then come back down to Main Street to the bus station there, and then it would come down and do the South End. And it would do the South End basically the same way that the trolleys did, except it would go way down to where Friendly's used to be, which is where Panera is now, and it would come back up, and it would go down Home Avenue, Pine Street, come back up, and then go back into the terminal. So that was another one. And then the Winooski route. The Winooski route ran by itself. It was a 20-minute trip. So you would leave the Burlington. You would leave the hitching post on Church and Main, do your Winooski loop, come back down to the terminal, go back over around and do that again and again. And then the North Avenue, you would run from the hitching post all the way out to Westward Drive on North Avenue, turn around, come back, and go to the Main Street Terminal. Then that trip would continue on to get down to Lakeside, do the loop around Lakeside, and come back up and go do that and repeat. So, and they were basically 8-hour days that were split up in shifts. So there were you have a morning shift, you'd have an afternoon shift. And the other thing that we did at Burlington Rapid Transit is we did school trips. So I graduated from Rice in '63. In 1967, I was picking up Rice kids and bringing them home. And there would be extra trips like North Avenue. There'd be an extra bus out there that would pick up BHS students, bring them up, turn around the loop. I had a trip that I was running into Winooski where I'd pick up all the students for Rice High School and bring them down and get on the interstate. And first time I ever drove a bus over 30 miles an hour was on the thruway, and loved every minute of it. Bring those kids to Rice High School, and those were split shifts. So you would start 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, and get done at 10:30, and start again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and work until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So that's how those routes worked out.
And in the 70s, when I went to Burlington High School, I remember it was 35 cents to take the so-called special from the south end of Burlington over to Burlington High School. And those buses at that point must have been about the oldest they had in the fleet. The big round ones. Yeah,
they're called Old Look, and they were 35-footers, and those were the ones that had the 4 cylinders in them. And those were the yellow and green ones. And the ones that came after that again were the 35-footers. They had a bigger engine in them. They were all glass in the front, and they could carry, I would think, another 20 or 30 more people on the buses. But yeah, those old buses were great. They were fun to drive. It's just a lot of fun to drive. I enjoyed driving the older ones better than I did the new ones. So
yeah, you could spend your entire life counting the rivets on those buses.
Yeah, they were well made up. Like I said,
very well made.
Yeah. And they were great heaters. Like I said, the little buses with the little 4 cylinders heated so much better than the big ones. So those were the ones you went for in the wintertime.
So Rodger, as we wrap things up here, do you have anything else from your show and tell collection?
Yeah. When everything got closed off, I was able to find one of these. This is a stencil that would go on the side of the buses, and it would predated me. The other design was different. So this predates me. This goes back to the 50s and probably right back to when he first designed it. And these were a transfer type of decal. You put it on, and after you put it on, you got all the wrinkles out of it, and then you put a coat of varnish over it to hold it on to the to the side of the bus. So that's kind of a keepsake that I've had. And the last thing is, I'll give you an idea of the uniforms never changed. That was the uniform that we had, and that was me back in 1973. That uniform was good for Vermont Transit and Burlington Rapid Transit, but there's a few years in between and a couple more pounds that I'm carrying than I did back in those days. So.
Well, thank you for watching our history of Burlington's early transportation. I always enjoy talking with Rodger about early rail history and bus history, and it's nice to be able to do it for the television.
Yeah, enjoyed it.